Greetings, sisters, and welcome to Wonder Woman, Warrior for Peace. My name is Angela, and this is Episode 8. Before we get into the comics this month, I got an email feedback that I'm going to read. This is from Professor Allen of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. He says, Angela, I'm not sure when I first heard your show, but over the last few months I've listened to all the episodes. I've thoroughly enjoyed the show. I love the concept of the podcast. Indexing various eras of comics was a great idea, as it gives us regular looks into how the character has been written over her 75-year history, and including the Linda Carter show is an added bonus. Take care and keep up the good work, Professor Allen. Well, thank you, Professor. I'm really glad you like the show. I put a lot of work into it, and it's good to hear that people are enjoying it. Actually, since I'm recording this the day before Thanksgiving, I want to thank everybody who listens and who has sent me feedback. It's really encouraging. I can't name all the names, but particularly, of course, Diablo Frank and Matt, my guests last episode. Darren and Ruth Sutherland have been a big support. Mark from I'm the Gun for playing my promo, thank you. All the people who follow Warrior for Peace on Twitter and Facebook, and who have left reviews on iTunes, thank you so much. I know this is just a little insignificant podcast, and I've only been around for a short while, but it's really encouraging every time I get feedback to know that people are not only listening, but actually liking this thing. So, thank you. Thank you all. So let's move on into the pre-crisis review. This is Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 7. Cover date is July 1942. Written by Charles Moulton, who we know was actually William Moulton Marsden, and the artist was Harry G. Peter. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Archives Volume 1. The issue starts with Steve and Colonel Darnell very worried that Diana is missing. They learn that she left for work with a suitcase and was planning to spend the weekend with a friend, but she called and cancelled and hasn't been seen since. Thinking maybe she's been captured by Paula von Gunther, Steve calls the prison but learns that the Baroness was executed last week. We flash back to Diana walking to work and see her stop to comfort a crying old lady holding hands with a little girl. The woman says that her boy Danny died of malnutrition because she couldn't afford milk after the price went up. Diana goes to buy the thin-looking little girl some milk, and is outraged to learn that the International Milk Company, who controls the entire supply, has raised the price to 26 cents a quart. After giving her purchase to the little girl, she heads to the International Milk Company's headquarters and storms her way into the office of President Alfonso Di Gippo. He explains that what they're doing is perfectly legal, although we see that their bad business practices have them over $7 million in debt as well as wasting perfectly good milk. When Diana insists that they've got to stop starving children, Di Gippo goes off to call his supervisor, who tells him that Diana is dangerous and not to let her go. He activates a trap door beneath Diana's feet, and she's soon being questioned by two goons. Learning she's carrying a suitcase because she'd planned on visiting a friend, they have Di Gippo's secretary impersonate Diana on the phone and cancel, then throw the spy into a milk tanker to get her to talk, having tied her to a sledgehammer so she can't float. They pour in can after can of milk, but she refuses to say anything. Finally, when they think she's drowned, the goons throw her suitcase into the tank and drive to the river to dump the body. But it turns out Diana is still alive, so she quickly frees herself, swims up to where she can breathe, and changes into the costume that was in her luggage. She then uses the sledgehammer to smash her way out of the tank, and when the goons stop to investigate, she lassos them and learns that Di Gippo said that the operation was run by a dead woman. Wonder Woman calls Steve to tell him, and he's sure the dead woman must be the executed von Gunther. He gives the prison doctor a lie detector test, where he learns that the Baroness was dead, but her body was given to her friends instead of being autopsied and buried. He tells Wonder Woman that von Gunther may have invented a way to come back from the dead, so she organizes a parade protesting the International Milk Company to draw the Baroness out. Sure enough, after the march ends, she's given an address by one of von Gunther's slaves, and when she arrives, she's caught and chained, which only von Gunther thinks renders her powerless. Playing along, Wonder Woman is taken to the milk plant and greeted by Di Gippo, but she sends a mental radio signal to Etta to bring Steve and the Holiday Girls to the plant. However, Di Gippo is one step ahead, ordering his men to trap the girls while he takes Wonder Woman. The superhero is chained to the front of a railroad tank carriage, and the Baroness finally reveals herself, saying she invented an electrical machine that brought her back to life. Baroness von Gunther then explains that depriving American children of milk means they will grow up weak, allowing Germany to easily defeat them in 20 years. At the plant, Steve and his men arrive and free the college girls, while the carriage Wonder Woman is chained to starts rolling down a hill toward a box of explosives. But since they're not welded to her bracelets, the Amazon easily breaks the chains and blocks the tracks with a fallen tree to save the perfectly good milk, then heads back to the plant where a fight has already broken out. Von Gunther is lassoed just as she's about to shoot Steve, and after the fight, she's compelled to sign a confession, although she'll only go to prison, since she legally can't be executed twice for the same crime. Diana Prince reads the headline about Wonder Woman breaking the milk racket, jealous that no one notices her unless she's in costume, and the issue ends with an image of Wonder Woman surrounded by children, touting milk as the perfect food. So, yeah, looking back, it seems a little silly to us today that they're having, children die of malnutrition because they can't afford milk. I mean, these aren't little babies. They're old enough to eat solid food. I mean, milk is healthy, don't get me wrong, but it's not like you're gonna die without it. I know, we look back and 26 cents a quart sounds, laughably cheap. But as near as I can tell, looking at sites that calculate inflation and the change of the value of a dollar over time, 26 cents a quart in 1942 is roughly equivalent to about $15 a gallon in 2016. Which certainly puts things into perspective. If you're listening to this in some far-flung future and you don't know how much that is, according to the U.S. Department of Labor statistics website here, the average price of milk in the U.S. in 2016 was about $3.30. So you're looking at about 4.5 times the normal price, which would certainly make it harder for people to afford milk. Naming this crooked businessman Digipo is kind of fun because, of course, Jip means, swindling someone or cheating them somehow, and that's exactly what he's doing with these milk prices. When Wonder Woman breaks out of the tank truck with a sledgehammer, it's pretty funny, because the guys who are driving it, they notice that the truck is being followed by just a ton of cats all, lapping up the milk and going crazy. Which is, pretty fun, kind of cartoony, Looney Tunes-esque even. Interesting that Von Gunther is said to have been executed, since at the end of the last issue, Wonder Woman took her to a special prison to try to reform her. I mean, these are comics from the 40s. Continuity between issues really isn't that big of a thing. I'm not entirely sure about the whole she can't be executed for the same crime twice. I mean, you'd think if the execution fails, they just try again. Or, well, okay, technically the execution didn't fail, she just came back. I'm pretty sure the law doesn't have any rulings about if you come back from the dead, you have to be executed again, so sure, let's go with that. But yeah, she literally pulls a Victor Frankenstein and comes back to life with electricity. Don't think that's ever going to be mentioned again, because, I mean, that could be, kind of a big deal in the world. Change the very nature of the human condition type of thing. But it's a comic book, and I'm pretty sure it's never going to be mentioned again. And, Steve gives the doctor a lie detector test when, Marsden himself worked on a lie detector machine for the better part of his life. It's worth noting, with the artwork, whenever someone catches Wonder Woman in a rope, it looks like a rope, but whenever she pulls out her own lasso, it's still a little row of dots to denote chain links, like in the last issue. So, I like this issue. Sure, there were some parts that are a little silly by today's standards, oh, these children are gonna grow up weak or die of malnutrition without milk. But, taking on social issues at the time, not a bad thing. So I'm going to give this one 3 stars. Okay, moving on to the post-crisis, we have Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 8, Time Passages. Cover date was September 1987. George Perez was the plotter and penciler. Len Wein and George Perez were the scripters. Bruce Patterson was the inker. John Costanza and L.S. McIntosh were the letterers. Tatiana Wood was the colorist. and Karen Berger was the editor. And I'm reading this in the Wonder Woman by George Perez omnibus. At Julia Capitellus's office in Harvard, the professor sits at her desk and works on her Wonder Woman journal. This is the first of 4 long sections of narration, accompanied by a few panels of artwork to illustrate the text. In Julia's segment, titled Journal, she talks about Wonder Woman appearing before the United Nations National Assembly, with Julia translating from Themyscira since Diana still felt too unskilled in English. Unfortunately, not all of the delegates appreciate her message of peace and love, especially the Russians, who thought her costume was too American and refused to believe her on what actually happened during the Ares affair. The controversy in politics only left Diana confused. Later, the military requested a meeting with Wonder Woman, and despite the advice of Julia, who'd been uninvited because she took Diana to a publicist when they wanted to keep the Ares thing quiet, she went. She was gone for a week, and when she got back, she canceled her public appearances and spent her time studying. This just happened to coincide with when a psychologist named G. Gordon Godfrey started a campaign to outlaw superheroes. His movement quickly gained followers, and Julia's family became a target for harboring Diana. When a brick with a note attached was thrown through their window, Diana decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. She suited up and went out to fight this madness. It was there she met other superheroes as they fought together in Washington, D.C. In the end, Godfrey tried to put on the helmet of superhero sorcerer Dr. Fate to gain immense magical powers, but he turned out to not be strong enough, and instead got his brain fried. Wonder Woman was asked to join the new Justice League, but instead chose to disappear on them. When Julia asked, she said her mission wasn't to become a costumed crime fighter, though she was impressed by what she saw, especially the fierce fighter Black Canary, the green-skinned Martian Manhunter, Captain Marvel, back before DC lost the rights and had to rename him Shazam, whose power comes from the Greek and Roman pantheons, and of course Superman, who Julia says seems to have some kind of secret with the Amazon. Eventually the military gave in and publicly admitted the truth about the Ares assault. A few days later, Julia and Diana were visited by Michaelis's widow and son. It was here that Diana, who, let's not forget, grew up on a peaceful island of immortal women, finally began to understand the fear and pain of losing a loved one in battle. As her mother's deadline draws near, Diana is still studying, trying to learn as much as she can about man's world. Julia ends her journal entry by noting that the Amazon is the closest thing she's had to a true friend, and she's going to miss her. We next see Barbara Minerva and Chuma on a plane from London to Boston. Barbara is thinking how someone named Tam, who's waiting for them in Boston, is the ideal candidate. She's in a foul mood from the trip, asking Chuma if the plant is safe, which it is, and snapping at the stewardess that her steak isn't rare enough. She wonders aloud about the authenticity of the lasso, and Chuma, who's reading a newspaper with an ad for Wonder Woman's farewell tour, tells her she knows it is and to relax, because tonight she and the plant are going to eat. The next narration section, titled Dispatch, is written from Etta at Lowry Air Force Base to Colonel Trevor. Etta tells him about the Wonder Woman maneuvers that happened when the military had their meeting with Diana. Etta was allowed to attend since Diana trusted her, but she wasn't supposed to say anything that might affect the princess's choice to cooperate. The military wanted to test Wonder Woman's powers, and she wanted to prove her, Etta's, and Trevor's accounts of the Ares assault true, and hopefully learn why her costume so closely matched the Americans' flag. The first test was an example of Diana's flashing thunder, which the military codenamed Bullets and Bracelets. When preparing for the test, Diana mentioned to Etta that she had been tested with a gun on Paradise Island to make sure she could survive modern weapons. Etta says the gun sounded like a .45 Magnum, which is only one away from being the most powerful handgun in the world and able to blow a man's head clean off. Etta wonders where the gun came from, though Diana doesn't explain. The Bullets and Bracelets test has 3 men in bulletproof clothing shooting Uzis at Wonder Woman point blank, but her arms moved so fast they were blurry even when the test footage was viewed frame by frame. The first test ended with Diana pulling the guns from the men's hands and crushing them, and the other tests followed suit. Lassoing a taxiing fighter jet and holding it in place, lifting a tank over her head, and flying more maneuverably than an F-14 Tomcat, aka Tom Cruise's plane from Top Gun. But when the military wanted to test her bracelets and lasso and try to replicate their powers, Wonder Woman refused. She returned to Professor Capitellus, and wasn't seen again until G. Gordon Godfrey tried to take over DC. Her being welcomed by the superheroes who defended Washington led to General Hillary announcing the truth about the Ares affair to the world. Etta ends her dispatch by saying she misses Steve and will be at Hanscom Base when he returns, and that she hopes his past experience won't make him want to leave the military. At the Boston airport, Barbara threatens retribution if the airline staff damage her plant, which is labeled as a museum exhibit. She meets up with Tam, a Scotsman who seems to be some kind of smuggler. He blathers on incessantly as Barbara thoughtfully examines a newspaper ad for Wonder Woman's farewell tour. At the Capitella's summer home, Vanessa is writing the next narration section, titled Dear Diary, as she sprawled across her bed. She finally had a chance to get to know Diana, and she thinks she's great. Diana told her how she's never seen a young girl before because she was the only child on Paradise Island. Vanessa muses on life on Themyscira, and is the epitome of an 80s teenager. It sounds great, except there's no movies, MTV, clothes shopping, or boys. Wonder Woman even took her flying, which was amazing, and they had a good talk. There's some typical diary stuff. Girls at her school have taken to wearing Wonder Woman brand cuff bracelets, and Vanessa's crush, a boy named Barry Locatelli, finally told her that he liked her and sat next to her when Wonder Woman came to visit to give a presentation. She thinks Diana's costume is weird and wants to get her more normal clothes, and she's heard everything in the presentation before, but was happy she was missing physics class. Other boys goofed off during the speech, but Barry paid close attention, and she hopes he'll ask her to the dance. Afterwards, one of those boys was showing a poster of Wonder Woman he'd marked up with obscene graffiti, so Vanessa and Barry started throwing punches. Her mother had to use her influence to stop Vanessa from getting suspended, and lectured her daughter on how Diana only uses violence as a last resort. Vanessa was grounded for a month, but it was all worth it because Barry thought she was cool, giving her a picture of himself and calling her his Wonder Woman. Ugh, I want to punch myself in the face. At a Boston hotel, Tam goes to Barbara's room at midnight to speak with her, but is refused entry by Chuma. The Scotsman lays his hand on the short man, but gets violently thrown across the hall. He yells at the now-closed door that he knows enough to go to the feds, and even to Faraday. Before dawn, Chuma is preparing the potion again, and Barbara asks if the letter has been received. He says it has, and comments that he approves of her choice of Tam. She says it wasn't a choice, but the plant is more important. All that's left is for Wonder Woman to believe her story. The last text section, narrated by Mindy Mayer, is called Tour Update, and takes the form of a letter to Julia. Mayer talks about how successful the Wonder Woman tour has been, especially after the Godfrey trouble and the military confirming Diana's account of the Ares assault. They've had to move quickly to meet Queen Hippolyta's deadline. Diana received the key to the city, appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and was honored by President Reagan after helping save the nation's capital. Merchandise has been flying off the shelves, and licensing has been arranged for Wonder Woman clothes and even a monthly comic book series published by DC Comics. After Diana leaves Man's World, her share of the profit will go toward the Wonder Woman Foundation, which promotes and publishes the contributions towards equality made by women over 40. Mindy says that while she'll miss Diana, it may be ultimately for the best if she returns to her home soon. Atheists, and other religious groups, have been unhappy with Wonder Woman's statements about the existence of the Greek gods. Adding to the other pressures like politics and the anti-superhero movement, it's all finally starting to get to Diana. In hopes of cheering her up, Mindy is including an encouraging letter they received from a Dr. Barbara Minerva. It reads that Minerva is a historian and archaeologist who's been following Wonder Woman's story with interest. She claims to have an artifact that she believes could be the second girdle of Gaia. She wants Wonder Woman to contact her in order to determine if the girdle is authentic, and hopes it will lead to revelations about what happened to Antiope and her group of Amazons, which Minerva says she thinks may still be alive. The text of this letter is interspersed with scenes of the police finding the mangled remains of Tamsin McConnell, a gunrunner who was arrested many times but never convicted. His body had been ripped apart by claws, and it seems as if he was killed by an animal which then started eating the body. The last panel of the issue shows the silhouette of a lithe female figure with long hair and a tail running across the rooftops. So yeah, interesting decision to change the format like that. It seems like they were kind of trying to fast forward through a bunch of stuff, But also it was recapping what happened with Diana in the Legends crossover that had recently finished up. Obviously that issue is outside of this show's focus, but from what I can tell from the web, basically she just showed up in the last issue of the crossover, fought the bad guys, everyone said, "Hey Wonder Woman, you're cool, you should join us," and then she disappeared. There's a really great picture here of Diana with the rest of the heroes from the League. Save for a few exceptions, they're all in their classic costumes. I know the costume they have for Black Canary is this weird blue bodysuit with black kind of shoulder wings and a headband. I just want to go, oh Dinah, just go back to the classic fishnets. We've also got the Ted Kord Blue Beetle, which is neat, and Guy Gardner with his awesome jacket but awful haircut. The scene here where Wonder Woman is picking up this tank and smashing it into the ground is a pretty obvious allusion to the cover of Action Comics #1. If you're not too familiar with comic book history, that was the first appearance of Superman. Basically the story that got superhero comics going. On that cover, he was picking up a car and smashing it into the ground. And actually, if you saw the movie Superman Returns, they kind of redid that shot in one of the scenes, which was pretty cool. We learned that Vanessa is 13 years old in this issue. We haven't had too much experience with her, but I kind of figured she was a year or two older, so good to know. And yeah, I'm sorry, but my patience with very cliched first-person teenager writing is rather slim, so I'm not exactly looking forward to more sections narrated by her. It was nice to see Etta comment on the gun on Paradise Island. It's just kind of the writer saying, hey, don't worry, we've not forgotten about this plot thread, we're going to get there eventually. There's a few panels in this issue that are in-world posters that are nicely designed and I thought would be cool to have as real posters. You've got one of Wonder Woman with her bracelets crossed over her head that seems to be really popular. And then you've got this Wonder Woman farewell tour design that looks pretty darn cool. I've looked online for, George Perez Wonder Woman posters to see if they were ever made in real life, but unfortunately I can't find any. There's a couple of art panels here where it talks about them licensing a Wonder Woman comic book. You see Wonder Woman with a few people looking at some pages, and then there's a shot of a newspaper article with a photo of Diana with those same 4 people. And if you look real close, you can see the caption for the photo lists George Perez, DC publisher Jeanette Kahn, Karen Berger, who's of course the editor, and Len Wein, the scripter. And it actually says Patterson, who would of course be Bruce Patterson, the inker, is unavailable for photo. So I thought that was pretty neat. I would say that it's like Marvel Comics creator Stan Lee having a cameo in all of the Marvel movies before Stan Lee cameos became a thing, except that I remember Fantastic Four Annual #3, where he and Jack Kirby had a cameo, and that was all the way back in 1965. So, I'm sorry, but Stan is the man, and you cannot beat him. One last fun Easter egg that I saw, the person who hands Mindy Mayer the letter from Barbara Minerva is wearing a yellow smiley face button with some blood dripping on it. If you're not too familiar with comics history, that's the iconic image from the Watchmen series that was being published about the same time as this issue would have come out. So yeah, it was interesting to see them try a different style, with most of it being narration, but I wasn't the world's biggest fan of it. The section that was going over what happened in Legends kind of reminded me of a clips show. You remember those? When, like, a sitcom would have an entire episode just made out of bits of other episodes, strung together with a, paper-thin plot, just to pad out the season and, I don't know, give the production team a bit of a break. And then the parts that were new kind of felt like, I don't know, a montage, I guess? Like, what was it, the 5th Harry Potter movie? Where the book was so long that to speed it up they had montage after montage to the point where it felt like, 3/4 of the movie was just quick clip set to music to barely get you through the plot. So yeah, I don't know, this isn't outright bad, it's just kind of okay. So let's go with 2 stars.
Warlord Worlds, a fan podcast devoted to the comic creations of Mike Grell, including Warlord, John Sable, Starslayer, Shaman's Tears, and Green Arrow. I'm Darren.
And I'm Ruth. We hope you'll join us as we discuss the stories, characters, and art in the many excellent comics from writer and artist Mike Grell.
Warlord Worlds is available at podbean.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
Find us at warlordworlds.com.
Moving on, our new 52 issue this month is Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 8, Casting Shadows. Cover date is June 2012. Executive editor was Eddie Berganza. Cover artist was Cliff Chiang. Writer was Brian Azzarello. Pencils and inks was Cliff Chiang. Colorist was Matthew Wilson. Letterer was Jared K. Fletcher. And the editors were Matt Idelson and Chris Conroy. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Volume 2, Guts. Wonder Woman, wearing a Grecian armor version of her traditional costume, gathers weapons for her trip to the underworld from Hephaestus' armory. The smith is amused that she's choosing melee weapons when he has stuff like assault rifles and submachine guns, but she says that's what she's used to. Lennox wants to take a minigun, but she tells him she's going alone except for Hermes, who's the only way to get to the underworld, besides, of course, the traditional route. Eros and the others must stay there in case she fails, so Hephaestus pulls the love god's golden guns out of his holsters and hands them to Wonder Woman, telling his astonished nephew, or son, depending on which version we're going with. Actually, knowing the Olympians, it could be both. Anyway, he tells Eros that she'll bring his guns back. Hermes and Wonder Woman arrive in the underworld, which the messenger god says looks different every time he visits, depending on Hades' whim. It seems he's been expecting her, as today it looks like an empty, shadowy version of London. Wonder Woman asks where all the dead people are, and Hermes explains that everything they're seeing is made of souls, which they can see by the light of his caduceus. As he explains that the souls are willing to do this because it basically gives them something to do, a statue of King Richard the Lionheart riding on horseback crumbles away behind them, revealing what looks like a skinned horse and rider carrying a sword. It charges at the 2 living figures, and hands spring out of the pavement to grab their ankles. Wonder Woman cuts these off with her sword, and Hermes dives at her, throwing them both out of the path of the rushing monster. The god tells her to find Zola, so she takes off through the trees, passing several more statues. These also break out of their stone shells to reveal more skinned figures, which attack the Amazon. As she fights them, she calls out to Hades, and his voice comes out of the monsters' mouths, telling her to honor their bargain. Hermes jumps in to help finish off the last foe, and once again they take off through the woods. They come to a recreation of Zola's farm, and the woman they've come to rescue steps onto the porch, shotgun in hand and significantly more pregnant than the last time we saw her. She's excited to see them and asks why they took so long, implying that months have passed for her while it's only been days for them. They go to leave, but Hades steps out of the fireplace, saying one of the children of Zeus must stay. As he does so, the souls that made up the house and forest disassemble themselves and circle the group, forming a sea of the dead. Hades insists that if Hera won't marry him, he wants to keep Zola and her child. Wonder Woman states that what he actually wants is a queen, and he replies that if she gives him Eros' pistols, he'll let Zola and the baby free, and Wonder Woman's lie about Hera will be forgiven. She hands over the guns, but as they walk away, Hades calls to her. He fires a pistol, and the Amazon goes to block it with her bracer, but the divine bullet goes right through her arm and into her heart. She falls to the ground, and Zola drops to her side. The Lord of the Dead tells Hermes to let the family know there's going to be a wedding, and the messenger has to pull Zola away so they can teleport, leaving Hades to comment that Wonder Woman is in love. The Greek armor version of her costume that she's wearing in this issue, some parts of it I like, some parts of it I don't. But what I really thought looked cool was the way Chang drew her hair in this issue. It's pulled up in the back and tied with some golden cords. It's not the lasso because you can see that's still at her side. It looks very ancient Greek. I have looked all over the internet trying to find a name for this hairstyle, but I've come up empty. The closest I could find was like YouTube tutorials where they just call it Greek goddess hairstyle, which, I was kind of hoping to find something a little more specific. I found a few websites talking about ancient Greek hairstyles, and the pictures that they have really make me realize how well-researched Harry Peters' artwork was in the 40s, because those look just like the styles that he used for the Amazons. It was good to see Hermes in action again. He got injured all the way back in issue 1, so now he's finally healed enough to take part in a fight, and it's good to see. He was slashing at I don't even know what you'd call them. They're not exactly zombies, but I don't know. Skinned monsters, maybe? Anyway, he was slashing at them with his talon feet, and that was pretty cool. From what I can research online, Zola looks to be about 5 months pregnant. When she was taken, she wasn't even showing, so yeah, it's been quite a while for her. Hades talks about wanting a queen, and obviously he shoots Diana with Eros' gun, which is, this is the updated version of Cupid's bow and arrow. So she's, falling in love with him. But I gotta say, he's already got a queen. What happened to Persephone? If you're not familiar with the myths, Persephone was the daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter, and one day Hades saw her and kidnapped her, took her down to the underworld, and Demeter was so sad and depressed that she basically stopped doing her, godly duties, I guess, and so the crops all died and it got cold and nasty. So finally Zeus had to step in and say, hey, Hades, give Demeter her daughter back. But he actually tricked her. He gave Persephone some pomegranate seeds to eat, which somehow meant that she had to spend part of the year down in the underworld with him. Basically, it was the Greek explanation for winter. The weather is nice, and then Persephone has to go to the underworld, so Demeter gets all sad, and the weather turns bad, and finally Persephone comes back, and Demeter's happy, and it's spring again. But yeah, I'm not sure what the Greeks' view on polygamy was, but off the top of my head, I can't think of any gods that had more than one wife. Normally it was just serial adultery, and normally that was mostly Zeus. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see how we deal with Wonder Woman now in love with Hades, and they're already planning the wedding. So yeah, the last bit at the end, I'm not sure you want to call it a twist exactly, but, where the bullet goes right through her bracer. I've seen that image online before, but yeah, that's shocking right there, for, 70-some years at that point, her bracelets have been bulletproof, and then all of a sudden, boom. Obviously this is a very, very special circumstance, literally a bullet of the gods. But yeah, it's still kind of mind-blowing. So overall, I like this issue. Let's give it 3 stars. Next up we have the TV show, Season 1, Episode 7, The Pluto File. Air date was Christmas Day 1976, starring Linda Carter and Lyle Waggoner. The Falcon was played by Robert Reed, and Professor Otis Warren was played by Hayden Rourke. At a secret testing site, Professor Warren is demonstrating his technique of creating miniature earthquakes by setting off a series of small dynamite explosions. He and his assistant Charles Benson tell Stephen Blankenship that the results should scale up to full-sized quakes, but the ultimate goal of the Pluto project is to control and eliminate earthquakes, not create them. A couple has flown into New York for a week-long romantic getaway, but the immigration official tells the man, an Englishman calling himself Fallon, that he must come with her. He tells his partner to contact the Irish legation and make sure a very large fuss is made. An hour later at the War Department, Blankenship tells Steve that an international mercenary called the Falcon has gotten through customs after passport control was unable to keep him detained due to his neutral passport. Learning from his file that the Falcon travels with a woman, Camilla Moret, Steve sends Diana to Central Intelligence to gather more info. We see the Falcon, disguised as an orderly, infiltrate a scientific institute to confront Professor Warren. He pulls a gun on the old man, claiming he represents an interested party and is willing to pay $1 million for the Pluto file. The professor refuses and alerts the guard, but after a struggle, the Falcon is victorious. Only 20 minutes later, Steve and Blankenship surveyed the aftermath. The Pluto file has gone missing, and Diana gets off the phone to tell them that Professor Warren survived but has been sedated after the shock and is being held at Walter Reed Hospital. We then get a quick scene of the Falcon with his admiring accomplice Frank testing a sniper rifle. Back at their office, Etta brings Steve and Blankenship a report that Camilla Moret is in a New York hospital with bubonic plague. Steve then gets a call that the guard who fought with the Falcon is also sick, so he and Diana go to the hospital. There the doctor tells them that the guard may have bubonic plague, but while Warren hasn't shown any symptoms yet, the incubation period can vary from hours to weeks. The most recent case of plague was 2 weeks ago in India, which just happens to coincide with the Falcon's last known location. They realize there's a chance he might be an unknowing carrier, so Diana goes to question Warren about his attacker's appearance, though not before getting an inoculation. He's still sleeping when she arrives, but through the window she happens to spot a figure aiming a sniper rifle from the roof of the building across the street. Diana quickly spins into her costume and blocks a bullet, then dives out the window in pursuit, but the Falcon gets away in a waiting car. We next see Warren's assistant Benson, in cahoots with the Falcon, planning an earthquake to take out a target near Bladensburg, Maryland. The hospital calls Steve's office to confirm the guard has bubonic plague. Learning Warren has returned to his lab, he and Diana plan a visit. They wonder if the Falcon had inside help, and Diana suggests re-examining Benson's alibi. As the Falcon and his accomplice go to set up the explosives, Warren describes the thief's appearance to the military. Steve informs the coughing Benson he may have been exposed to bubonic plague. When he asks point blank if he's been in contact with the Falcon, the assistant pulls a gun on Steve, grabs the keys to the new security system, and runs out the door. Diana, who had gone to bring the car around, sees him trying to get away on foot, so she spins into her costume and catches him in her lasso. She's able to confirm that he's working with the Falcon before he collapses from his illness. As he's being loaded into an ambulance, Wonder Woman and Steve confirm that the Falcon is the one spreading the plague, but Benson won't be able to tell them his location until he's recovered, at which point it could be too late. After stopping for gas, the Falcon and Frank, who's starting to show symptoms of the plague, reach Bladensburg, where it's revealed their target is an experimental atomic reactor lab. According to the Falcon, when their earthquake blows up the lab, it will also take out Washington, D.C. in a nuclear fireball. Learning there's yet another case of bubonic plague, Steve and Diana go to the hospital to question the patient. He turns out to be the gas station attendant from Bladensburg, and when asked if he's been in contact with any strangers, gives them a description of the Falcon and his accomplice. Blankenship had actually wanted the two to meet him at the top security installation near the small town, so they head there next. They report their findings to the General, who realizes that if the Falcon used the Pluto project on the Manhattan Project reactor, it would be disastrous. We next see the Falcon and the sick Frank planting the last of the dynamite charges. As the men drive off, Diana excuses herself from the tour of the reactor, making her way outside and spinning into her costume. She's too late, however, and the explosions go off, shaking the lab. The head scientist says it's impossible to stop their current experiment without cooling the core, which is very risky and will take presidential authorization. As they flee, the Falcon explains the tremors they've started will grow stronger and stronger over the next 8 hours. The only man who could possibly stop them is Professor Warren, so he must be eliminated. Wonder Woman goes to Warren's lab to help him develop a way to stop the quake. As the Falcon waits for an opportunity to get to the Professor, Steve and Blankenship receive permission to cool the core, but there's not enough time to evacuate DC in case it doesn't work. Frank causes a diversion, letting the Falcon sneak in, but when Wonder Woman shows up, he finally falls down, too sick to fight. She tells the guard to call an ambulance, then goes back to the Professor. The reactor coolant turns out not to work, so it's all up to Warren. They seem to have made a breakthrough, but then the Falcon appears, gun aimed. Wonder Woman points out that her presence makes his firearm useless, informs him that the cough he's just developed is bubonic plague, and tries to appeal to his better nature, but it doesn't seem to work. Suddenly, a tremor throws them all off their feet, and Wonder Woman manages to get her lasso around the Falcon. After some more coughing, he asks for a glass of water, which gives the Professor a brilliant idea. He calls the nuclear lab and tells them to flood the reactor with water instead of coolant, saying he's sure that will work. The Falcon admits he admires both Warren and Wonder Woman, and says it's a shame they're not on the same side. But Wonder Woman reminds him it's not too late to change. The episode ends with Diana telling Steve that the plague victims are all recovering. Steve notes that the Falcon will spend the rest of the war in jail, and Etta says it's a shame someone so intelligent used his talents for destruction. Diana replied he may find a better way to use his skills now that he has time to think, and Steve comments that that's just what Wonder Woman would think. One fun thing about this episode being filmed in the 70s, but set in the 40s, at the beginning, Warren actually lists some earthquake predictions that he's made, and of course all of them are true because all of them had happened by the time the episode was filmed. The only one that didn't happen was, he mentioned a quake in Hawaii in 1981, and of course it was 1976 at that point, so they had no idea. Robert Reed, who played the Falcon, is of course most famous for Mike Brady, the dad from the Brady Bunch. He died in 1992, but if you're listening to this episode relatively soon after it comes out, I'm sure you'll know that we lost Florence Henderson, the mom from the Brady Bunch, just this past week. From what I'm reading online, the Falcon's actually supposed to be Irish, which would be why he says at the beginning to call the Irish legation, but his accent was English, so yeah, I'm not sure what's up with that. Maybe Robert Reed just wasn't that good at accents. Hayden Rourke is of course most famous for playing Dr. Bellows on I Dream of Jeannie. They do mention in the show that even though bubonic plague is mostly associated with the Middle Ages, it does happen in modern times. I've actually found an article here about 15 cases in the United States alone in 2015. So thankfully we've advanced to the point where it's not going to kill, what was it, like 60% of Europe back in the day? But it's definitely still a risk, unlike, say, smallpox. As it turns out, I actually have family who used to live in Bladensburg, and apparently it's actually pronounced Bladensburg, but because of the way they pronounced it on the show, I decided to pronounce it the same way for my recap. So, sorry, residents of Bladensburg, who for the last 40 years have been excited that someone actually mentioned their small town on TV, but really annoyed that they mispronounced it. I did think the ending was a little forced, I guess. I mean, really? Water? The brilliant idea to cool the reactor is to just use water? Why didn't literally anyone else think of that beforehand? I mean, the guy even says, yeah, I'm a seismologist, not a nuclear scientist, but trust me, this is gonna work. I know some chemistry. Seriously? It's just a little... What was it? War of the Worlds, Signs... What was that alien invasion movie where it was like the only way to defeat the interstellar conquerors with the giant death ship UFOs was to spray them with a super soaker? It just seemed a little ridiculous. But to be fair, other than the kind of ridiculous water ending, which was literally like the last 2.5 minutes, I did like this episode, so let's give it 3 stars.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
Not too much in the way of news this month. The popular YouTube channel Epic Rap Battles of History, their newest episode is a rap battle between Wonder Woman and Stevie Wonder, which is kind of fun. I will link that in the show notes. The only other thing is, of course, the trailer, which I hope you've seen by now. If you haven't seen it, what are you doing listening to this podcast? Like, stop it right now, go watch the trailer, and come back, because it was amazing. Don't worry, I'll wait. Just pause the podcast right now, go to YouTube, look up the trailer, watch it 3 or 4 more times, and then come back. I'll wait. Okay, you good? Okay. How cool is that trailer? We finally have bullets and bracelets. I'm so excited. Paradise Island looks amazing. Steve calls World War I the war to end all wars, because I'm pretty sure that's what a lot of people actually called it back in the day. Obviously, they wouldn't have known to call it World War I, because the next one wasn't for another few decades. We have basically everything except official confirmation that the one character with the weird mask is Dr. Poison, which works in a World War I setting, because that's when you had mustard gas and all that other horribleness. One part that I'm not a huge fan of, it kind of looks like Wonder Woman is stealing this costume and a sword and shield instead of winning it fairly in the contest. I like the contest part of her origin, so maybe if we're lucky we'll have at least some kind of reference to that, and then, I don't know, maybe her mother just decides, nope, too bad, you're still not gonna go, and so she has to break in and steal the stuff. Yeah, I don't know. We finally have bullets and bracelets. Did I mention that? I am so excited that we finally have bullets and bracelets. We get to see her using the lasso again. And there's a bit here at the end where it almost sort of kind of looks like she's flying. It's hard to tell. I did think the joke at the end with Etta fell kind of flat. Preferred the one from the first trailer, but that might just be because that one we were, finally getting our first real look at Etta, and it was glorious. So yeah, obviously I'm excited by the trailer, and I really hope that the movie can live up. But yeah, that's it for this month. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, or queries, you can email me at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace@gmail.com. Let me know if you're okay with your message being read on the podcast. The podcast homepage is wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. There you can find links to the iTunes and Stitcher feeds, as well as the RSS feed and the show notes. You can look the show up on Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace, and on Twitter and Pinterest as Wonder Woman WFP. The intro music was Wonder Woman Theme, the Best Themysciran Symphony Dialogue Dance Mix by Taz Damien Devil. You can watch the full video on his YouTube channel. The outro music is Wonder by the Double Clicks, and you can find them on their website at thedoubleclicks.com. Next episode, I will be reviewing Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 8, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 9, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 9, and Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 8. But until then, remember, sisters, hopes may fade, but wonders never cease.
'Cause you're not a quitter, you still believe the truth's in your lasso, your heart's on your sleeve, and when we're drowning in darkness, you'll save us all from